Also, want to let folks know that we may have seen we have new membership levels at Eno. We are an organization that has lots of partners all across the country. We have new uh, tiers that you can look at, and you can sign up for lots of different things, receiving information about these webinars and things like that, and a whole host of other member benefits. So please do take a look at that when you get a chance. We are now rejoined by Jeff Davis. Thank you for letting me vamp for a few minutes there, a couple of commercials. Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. 11 a.m. sharp is a hard time to have your Wi-Fi go out at home. So now we're back. Okay. President Biden's FY 2025 transportation budget request. That's me. So first of all, just brief big picture here. The federal government at OMB measures something like total infrastructure spending across all agencies and departments. They call it major public physical capital, and you separate the Defense Department stuff out of that because aircraft carriers and tanks are capital. And you can see that we've gone from back in 2017 about 118 billion in total government-wide spending, checks on if there were outlays, and that's estimated to be about 231 billion this year, a tremendous increase government-wide, much of it due to that last 2-year ramp up from the IIJA starting to get going. However, as we are mostly aware, inflation has taken a bit of that. So the reason I chose 2017 as a starting point, because OMB inflates their dollars every 10 years or so, and the last time they did it was 2017. So you can see in the blue column of what we saw before of the nominal dollars, and the green column are 2017 dollars, and we've lost, in the delta by the time you get to this upcoming year, 2025, it's about $55 billion. That's almost an entire federal aid highway program worth of outlays that we've lost to inflation in the last 5 or 6 years. So it's continuing to be a problem. Everyone's long-range forecasting to be readjusted because of that. Also, this new budget still has no plan for IIJA expiration. Still has no plan for IIJA expiration. Okay. Yep. So you can see that it's in the budget from the IIJA money goes down and out the door. So at the end of fiscal 2026, you lose $38 billion because the IIJA only provided 5 years worth of advanced appropriations. And all the 10-year budget totals in the Biden budget are still assuming that none of that money is replaced, that it just goes away at the end of 2026. So at some point, they're probably going to change their minds on that. But this is not the year that they're showing up for doing that yet. And then the last thing here on the mega picture is this is the amount of percentage of GDP that the federal government is spending on interest on the national debt. And you can see that we've now gotten back across the 3.5% range. And we've lost all the progress that we made this chart starts in 1990, when you had the big Bush the First budget summit and all the Budget Enforcement Act of 1990 that started the discretionary caps and pay-as-you-go budgeting. And then those spending disciplines and tax increases were extended by President Clinton in 1993 and gave us the gradual glide path to balance and the resulting decreases in the national debt as a share of GDP. And now we're back to the level that it was in the Clinton administration. So, and you can, and those of us who are old enough to remember that at that point, the reason that Bush and Clinton got so serious about deficit reduction was that the bond market was starting to give problems to Treasury on debt service, and also it was messing with things like mortgage rates. We're getting too high. So part of the deal was there was a lot of pressure by economists and banks on Congress to lower deficits for those reasons, and I expect those same behaviors are going to come back in the future. So in the future, we're going to be looking at more spending austerity rather than less, until we can move the needle and get net interest as a smaller part of GDP again. So now we're going to turn to the specific stuff in the FY 2025 DOT budget. So first of all, how it compares to past years. total USD spending authority is about $146 billion from all sources in this budget request. And you can see here my favorite chart that I've made of this. Go back to 2017, which was the year before President Trump and the Democrats decided to junk the old spending caps and just work around them. The blue columns are contract authority from the Highway Trust Fund and the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. The green columns on top of that are the general fund monies that are the annual budget from US DOT, from the DOT Appropriations Act. And then the orange columns on top of that are the IIJ advances. And then there was 1 year of like $5.6 billion of Inflation Reduction Act money. So, and you can see, that. So, look at this. You can see that between the IIJ money and the contract authority, the advance of the contract authority, only about 20% of the DOT budget actually has to come from the annual appropriations bill that's being done this year. Slide, please. The 100 billion. The blue and green parts of the donut are something that's automatically happening. And then there's so all we've got to do in the appropriations process is provide that 25.7, I think it is, $billion of annual appropriations, and they're looking to get $4.45 billion of new mandatory money from the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. Slide, please. And basically, here's sort of a modal look at of how this would look. But highways is still a little less than half of the total budget. There's IIJ and everything all in. And you've got at $71.5 billion, transit and rail $37.5 billion, 27.4 for aviation, and then everything else, multimodal, safety, maritime, OST, at 9.8. Slide, please. So, what are they asking Congress to do? They're asking four things. They want Congress to appropriate $25.67 billion in new discretionary appropriations, gross, provide $3.35 billion a year in new contract authority for the airport improvement program out of the authorization bill that's pending now. They want, and this is new, $8 billion over 5 years in new mandatory budget authority for a new FAA capital program, of which $1 billion would occur in the first year. And again, it's a wonder why they didn't ask for this a year ago when Congress was drafting the budget authority. The FAA bill, and transfer $800 million of unused TIFIA authority from the office to the Office of the Secretary for your purpose for those raise and mega grants. Slide, please. Now, this is the first year back with spending caps that Biden has done. So, and the last year their budget requested $809 billion, I think, in non-defense appropriations because it was not capped. Then the Fiscal Responsibility Act was enacted after that budget happened. So the new request for that same amount, they gone from $809 billion down to $734 billion, which is the cap level. Of that, about 3.4% would go to DOT, $25.1 billion, and plus $378 million from the defense cap, which is separate. So the gross amount of money, as I mentioned, is after the fees and rescissions and things that are offsets, $25.672 billion they want Congress to appropriate this year. Slide, please. They got to protect the priorities. So the first thing that DOT did was to protect the top priorities of FAA operations, both air traffic control, delays, and safety. I don't want to get blamed for either of those. And FAA capital got a substantial boost, a 6.8% increase in FAA operations and almost 11% for capital, regular capital. And so that means that what started off as a 6% cut in total discretionary now is a 26% cut once you taking those favored children off. And then they also protect their other top large priorities. Amtrak Northeast Corridor, Amtrak National Network, and the FTA capital investment grants all get increases. So then that only leaves $3.35 billion left for the entire rest of the department, which is a 40, almost a 50% cut from last year. So how do you dig yourself out of that hole? Slide, please. Well, first of all, you make cuts that you know Congress is going to restore. They're voting to kill the raise and mega grants out of the regular appropriations process, which Congress won't do because then they won't have any say in how it's spent. And also, they propose to kill the $2.8 billion in earmarked special projects that Congress created, which they're not going to do. And then they also color outside the lines, aka cheating. They propose to transfer stuff, mandatory budget stuff, to discretionary for $800 million out of TIFIA for the raised grants. And that's probably not going to happen because the T&I committee and EPW committee they believe that money's their property. They don't want the appropriations committees messing with it. And they also want $1 billion and this whole new $8 billion fund for new FAA facility replacement. They're going to replace TRACONs. They're going to replace air traffic control towers. Slide, please. It's my favorite table here that goes back to 2017 again, mostly big ticket items. There's like 9 or 10 accounts that are in the 500 million plus range or have been, and together they add up about 90% of the FAA, but about the DOT budget. But again, once they've made cuts that I know Congress will restore and they've colored outside the lines, you've got a nice little increase for everybody. Slide, please. Okay, mode by mode. Highways. They propose to increase the obligation limitation $800 million above the IIJ level, and then take that $800 million and corresponding amount of contract authority, transfer it to OST for raise and mega grants. They do not specify how much money would be for raise grants and how much would be for mega grants. They also would fix the August redistribution problem, or at least start to fix it. Right now, there's about $6 billion a year in new allocated non-formula contract authority every year, and it gets either dollar for dollar or close to dollar for dollar obligation limitation at the front end of the year. And then if that can't be obligated, then they give it back up in August. That gets redistributed to states and for formula money to be used by September 30th, or it lapses. And then the next October 1st, or whenever the DOT bill passes, they get another. That unobligated contract authority gets another dollar again off the top, and they have to give it up. So, and these new discretionary programs at FHWA are getting slower and slower to obligate, and they're clouding this up. So right now, this year it looks like there's going to be about $8.5 billion taken off the front end and then given back to the states at the end. It's not really an efficient way to do things. So the budget proposes that the next op limit for 2025 do a whole separate process for all these formula allocated programs, and they would get a separate obligation limitation that would not expire, but last as long as the contract authority would, and be separate and not get redistributed. So then, and eventually, the balances of previous allocated contract authority that were subject to the overall ob limit would spend down, and so this would stop the August redistribution from growing and allow it to shrink back down over the next few years. It used to be like the $1 to $2 billion range 10 years ago, so get farther back down towards that. And there's no other FHWA appropriations are proposed. No highway infrastructure programs, no earmarks, no nothing. Slide, please. For mass transit, they propose to maintain all the IIJ provided funding levels, and they got a bunch of different proposed policy changes here. They want to address the fiscal cliff by allowing providers in urban areas over 200,000 population to flex their 5307 capital money from capital to operating at a reduced federal share. And they propose to increase the maximum federal share of elderly, disabled, and rural formula grants from 80% to 100%. They proposed both those last year, and Congress ignored it. But we'll see what happens this year. They propose to increase the maximum federal share for bus grants to Indian tribes to 100%. And the time to propose something like that is definitely while Tom Cole is chairman of the subcommittee, so that has a shot. They propose to make bicycle and scooter projects eligible for mass transit funding by defining them as something called Associated Transit Improvements, something like that, in 5302, paragraph 2. They propose to disincentivize excessive bus customization that drives up prices. And Eno's Garrett Schroed did a nice article in ETW last October about this that drew a lot of attention. It was a factor in the Proterra bankruptcy. And so it allows FTA at their discretion to reduce the federal share of a competitive low-no or low-no bus grant down to 50% to disincentivize excessive customization. And they propose to get rid of the category set-asides of the IRA, the IIJ's 1.6 billion in CIG money. For example, I think 880 million was the most they could spend on new starts. And there were set-asides for core capacity and for the EPD pilot that there aren't any projects in the chute this year that are ready for that. So, and the Appropriations Committee already did this in the FY24 bill that was not signed after this budget went to press. So they propose to do that again in 2025. So that will probably happen. Slide, please. On the CIG side, you've got like 1.03 billion for the 4 current new starts that have signed. And again, my chart here has a bunch of question marks on it because we don't know what the appropriation was in 2024 for any of these individual new start projects because they weren't listed in the bill or conference report, and we'll have to wait and see how FTA allocates the money. So we don't know how much is provided in 2024. So we also don't know what's needed after 2025. But they propose, to pay off, close to paying off, LA West Side Section 3, Minneapolis Southwest LRT, Seattle Linwood, and then make a second installment on 2nd Avenue Subway. And they propose 6 new signings they think will be ready this year. The big one, Hudson River Tunnel, $700 million a year draw, plus Inglewood, which has to be ready for the Olympics, Trans-Bay Corridor, Miami Northeast, Chicago Red Line, and the San Antonio North-South. So net appropriation of 2.366 billion plus the 1.6 from IIJ is what they request for the CIG program. That's inflated by almost 240 million because they said 60 million for projects to be named later in each of the 4 categories. So if you take that away, and subtract 239 million from 2.366, and you get the actual substantive programmatic request. Slide, please. Aviation. They asked for handsome increases for air traffic control and safety. 7.9% increase, I think, 7.1% increase for the air traffic organization. 4.9% increase for aviation safety. 14-something% increase in the capital account just for air traffic control. They're increasing the goal for controller new hires from 1,800 a year to 2,000 a year. Sorely needed. Slide, please. But they've also this new $8 billion capital program over 5 years, 1 billion, 2 billion, 11222. As you can see here, over 5 years, they anticipate $2.5 billion to replace towers at individual airports and TRACON facilities. Another $2.5 billion to replace en route or recapitalize the en route stations. $2 billion for radars, and then $1 billion for personnel expenses. And again, the budget justifications list all of the facilities that are on the nominee list to get this funding, and they also indicate this is going to be a generational thing. They're going to be proposing more multi-year funding after these 5 years, and they make a good case of why you need multi-year funding certainty for this kind of thing. They make a very good case for why it's needed. But again, the time to propose this was when Congress was drafting the 5-year FAA bill a year ago. They wanted to be mandatory money drawn from the Highway Trust Fund, but not contract authority, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, again, it's an interesting sounding program. It fulfills a need, but the time to bring this up was before Congress was basically done writing the 5-year FAA bill. Next slide. They also have a revenue issue. They increase you may have heard Biden, the State of the Union, had some offhand remark about taxing billionaires and private jets and something else, 1% for corporations, whatever. But they do propose to increase the current rate of kerosene tax on jet fuel for non-airline jets from 21.8 cents per gallon all the way up to $1.06 a gallon, 106 over 5 years. The equal installments increase over 5 years. And they estimate that'll raise $2.5 billion in taxes for the Airport and Airway Trust Fund over 10 years. It was those famous anti-one percenter, fat cat hating George W. Bush administration that actually last proposed to make business jets, corporate jets, pay their fair share of air traffic control. They had this big cost allocation study. I remember I was there in Marion Blakey's conference room at February 2007, hearing her explain all this. A big cost allocation study from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they were going to charge airlines fees, but then they were for general aviation, they did a few fuel taxes, and they proposed with their cost allocation to increase the tax on private jet fuel to 70 cents per gallon. I don't know if the administration has a revised cost allocation study or anything else, or if they're just constant, with the inflation and the increase in the FAA budget from 2007 to now. If that's, but it's in the ballpark. $1.06 is in the ballpark of what might be with inflation and FAA costs increasing of what 70 cents in 2007 would be today. So it's not unheard of. This is so if people want to make it partisan, well, it may seem partisan when Biden said it, but again, this was a George W. Bush proposal that's been somewhat altered. But again, the time to deal with this is before the Ways and Means Committee marks up and the Senate Finance Committee mark up, or chooses not to mark up in Senate Finance's case, the revenue title that extends Airport and Airway Trust Fund taxes, and including the kerosene tax, for 5 years. Slide, please. The railroad side, there's really nothing ambitious in the FY25 budget request. It's $3.2 billion, which is dwarfed by the $7.2 billion that they get each year from the IIJA, most of that corridor stuff. They've given up asking for significant increases in CRISI that Congress wasn't providing. Congress is earmarking the money instead. My national network and CRISI numbers exclude the earmarks, so that's including there's a $40 million earmark in all but name for Chicago Union Station and Amtrak National Network in the FY24 bill. So I have removed that from the total in case it doesn't match up with your numbers. But there's still a almost a 10% increase for safety and operations. So we'll see if that maintains the process. And they move Amtrak NEC back to the authorized level. And the national network is still in flux. It's got so much money on the capital side in IIJA. Next slide, please. And the Office of the Secretary, again, they propose to zero out the discretionary appropriation for raise grants and instead move money over from the mandatory side, take it from TIFIA and the Federal Highway Administration without indicating how much is for the RAISE program and how much is for mega projects. Remember that RAISE also gets $1.5 billion from the IIJA, and mega also gets $1 billion from IIJA. Some people think that should be reversed, and mega is more underfunded than RAISE is, but RAISE is more popular because it's spread more widely. There's a 52% increase for cybersecurity. The administration again asks for $25 million for thriving communities, and the FY24 Act and a Tom Cole special sort of rename that program rural and tribal, communities, emphasizing that, the program has a lot of the same features as thriving communities, but it's focused on rural and tribes. There's a $12.9 million increase proposed in OSTR for the ARPA-I initiative, and EAS Essential Air Service discretionary jumps by 21% to a discretionary appropriation of $423 million, in addition to the mandatory fee stuff, which is about flat, because that brings out that all depends on who flies over America in any given month, and it is what it is. So that is the end of the presentation. Be glad to answer any questions.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Jeff. Thanks for running through all of that. the tech gremlins got us there at the beginning, but as folks can see, there's a ton of information here that Jeff has sorted through, and this is truly a rapid response webinar. We've been working on it right up until we went live. So thank you all for hanging with us. There is a ton of information here. It is going to be made available on our on Eno's YouTube site. You can go back and flip through all of it, flip through the recording then, where all these numbers will be available. It is a ton to go through. So we do have some time for questions. So please go ahead and use that Q&A function on the webinar website. We have a couple of things that have come in already. We'll try to take them as best we can with the time we have left. So Jeff, let's just start kind of big and broad. So given all of this, you're obviously an expert in going through all of the details and all these amazing numbers that are in here. What does this as a whole then say then about the kind of the administration's policy priorities then, for the coming fiscal year? How do you take all this together, and what do you think the administration adds up to with all of
this? This is mostly a sort of placeholder budget. It's in a capped year. They can't make any significant new proposals that are subject to the annual discretionary caps, and they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do if granted the second term to reauthorize and replace the IIJA when it expires in 2026. There's not that much difference. Again, and also they drafted this budget before they knew what FY 2024 was going to be. So there's, in many cases, there's not a great deal of difference between the 2024 Act and this. They always err on the side of being a little optimistic on what Congress is going to give them on some of the personnel accounts. Although the problem with doing a detailed request before you know the bill, if you look at the fine print in the Office of the Secretary, and when I say fine print, I mean it, because they used in the OST tables in the front of the part the smallest font a laser printer is capable of making. I could barely read it. OST's tables in the front, but for some of the offices within the Office of the Secretary, they actually asked for less money than the bill that was signed Friday night actually gave them. So there's you always run into, when you get specific, you always run into that risk when you're flying blind. But again, this is sort of a sort of holding pattern budget for the most part, except for those interesting new aviation proposals, which should have been made a year ago.
Mm-hmm. And say a little more on that. So a couple folks were asking, what did you mean by it? This is clearly not just a timing issue. There's some miscommunication or something went wrong with the process. Say a little more on what you mean about that.
I don't know for sure, because I wasn't at the press conference at DOT yesterday where I would have asked about that, because it was an in-person press conference. But that they're asking for mandatory budget authority, which the appropriations committees by rule are not supposed to do in their bills, which means it's the authorizing committees, and the authorizing committees only do this every 5 years. And the House passed its bill last June or July, and the Senate committee finally, after months of not having its act together, got its act together and marked up its own bill that has none of this stuff in it. And they're trying to work it out so that the House and Senate can just. Senator Schumer had said he only wants to go through the cloture process of forcing the FAA bill to the floor once, not once on the way to conference and a second time on the way out of conference, just once, because we suspect it's going to be filibustered no matter what, because it's got new slots for Reagan National Airport, so the Virginia senators are going to filibuster the bill. And it takes a week to break a filibuster, and on legislation, and Schumer's not going to do it twice. So they're trying right now. The House and the Senate staff are meeting to try to negotiate the House-passed bill with the Senate committee bill into a final version that the Senate can go ahead and pass on something else, and the House will just accept. And I don't think the administration is asking the Senate Commerce Committee to go back and reopen the markup of its bill to consider these proposals. And the Senate Finance Committee, as far as I know, wasn't going to actually hold a markup. They were just going to include acquiesce to the House's simple extension of all existing tax rates for 5 years. So I don't see how either of these proposals get considered in time to be in the 5-year bill that Schumer wants to have passed and signed into law by May. It's 2 months. A lot of work on this.
Thank you. Those are great insights. So, keeping big and broad for a second. So, is there anything that's conspicuously absent from here? Is there anything you thought you were going to see? Is there anything that's missing? What's the general reaction to what's not in here?
I keep waiting for the for someone to actually admit they don't want the IA advantage, all of them, to expire forever in 2025, and that they want to keep those going. But instead, and I think government wide, it's a 38 at DOT a year, 60 some government wide, and instead they're using the 27, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 years times 6, 6, 8, 40. It's almost $500 billion that they are saving out of below baseline by pretending that they don't want this money extended. They're going to have to reverse themselves on that at some point, but this was not the year. But I keep waiting for that.
Got it. Some specific questions are coming in now. A couple of these things around TIFIA. You mentioned the money that's being transferred to the discretionary program. So what's going on with TIFIA? Have these projects slowed down? Why the change here with that program?
Okay, TIFIA makes loans, but under the Federal Credit Reform Act of 1990, in order to make a loan, you have to spend some what's called subsidy budget authority. So the mandarins out of the OMB and DOT, they look at each proposed loan and they calculate how much it would cost the federal government to administer that loan over its life, and the difference that between the interest differentials. Default risk is a big thing, and they calculate what the total cost of the lifetime of the loan is to the federal government, and it's cents on the dollar. And then you have to appropriate that much or provide that much money when you make the loan. So the TIFIA has been getting $250 million a year, but interest rates were so low for a long time that they could loan, $100 million and only use like $2 million of subsidy costs. So between the fact that there are other kinds of loans, like student loans, the subsidy cost like a third of the face value or something like that at one point. But for 3 or 4 cents on the dollar was all it cost in subsidy cost to make these loans. And so between the subsidy cost being so low and the fact there just aren't enough qualifying projects that can get business the investment grade ratings or whatever to be a part of it, TIFIA has never been able to come close to spending all of its money. 2 years ago, at the FY 2022 August redistribution, August 2022, there was $1.724 billion of unobligated TIFIA contract authority for making those subsidies that was unused and had to be given back to states in the August redistribution. And that has grown since then. It would have been over $2 billion now. Congress stole $200 million of it in the bill that Biden signed Friday night to pay for the old Jack Reed Bridge program. But and so that's the problem. Is that you could cut. They'll never be able to find enough projects to use $1.7 billion worth of TIFIA contract authority. And so the T&I guys were trying to wait until the next reauthorization bill in 2027 or 2028, and they would take $1 billion and change out of that and put it somewhere else where they could use it for their programs. They don't want the appropriators doing it for the Patty Murray, Susan Collins raise grant program. So that's what it is. But like I said, there was $1.7 billion in unused money 2 years ago, and no one would have missed if you'd taken 1.5 or 1.6 of that away.
Got it. One other specific question on the, I think it was the OST slide. You had a line in there on an increase for cyber programs. Any more details on that? What does it look like now, and what's the increase going for?
They've had a separate line item in the OST budget for years for cyber security. Let me find where it was. It's been about $50 million a year for the last 2 or 3 years, and they're proposing to take it from 74.6. I haven't delved deep. The budget estimates are down on the DOT website now. And like I said, once you get past the fine print in OST, there's a short chapter of explanation in the back about why they need that money. I just haven't gotten through to it yet.
And one other specific question was around, you mentioned, I think it was in the FTA slide, around bikes and scooters are available for transit money. How unusual is something like that? Obviously, these are two, I guess, modes that the federal government has been paying attention to. It's probably a small amount, but how do we think about those kinds of areas?
It is unusual. They've in section 5302 of Title 49 U.S. Code is the list of it defines all the terms that are used in Chapter 53 transit law, and uh, paragraph 2 in there is that I think it's called associated transit improvement, something with a transit improvement, and it they were adding bicycle and scooter stations, including sharing stations and that kind of associated infrastructure, as associated mass transit costs. They'll be eligible for funding in using most of your federal transit formula aid. It's a little unusual, and we'll see if people go along with it. But it, if I don't remember seeing that in the budget last year or the year before, so it's a new one, and we'll see where it goes. I don't know how much they don't have an estimate on how much they think different providers might use that and how much it might cost.
You're right. That the questioner was asking that too. Is this unique to this year? Basically, your comment. Yeah, this wasn't in there last year. So,
right.
Time for just one or two more. So, do you see recommended changes to the RIF program? You talk about TIFIAs. Anything on RIF that stuck out to you this year?
Not that I saw. There's the usual negative subsidy that takes place behind the scenes. I don't remember seeing any general provisions related to any kind of fundamental RIF changes. But I didn't necessarily see that paragraph though. I was busy looking at the other stuff. I'll go back and take a look. Oh, it's Bozzy. Bozzy. I'll look at that and let you know.
Got it. There's an awful lot to go through. It's amazing that you're able to dig through. What is an awful lot of information here, providing a really valuable resource to a lot of people here in the field. So I want to thank you all very much for your participation. Jeff, thank you so much for all your work going through all this and presenting all this information in such a clear and concise way. As I mentioned, this recording from this webinar will be up on our YouTube website, Transportation on YouTube. You should be able to search and find that. And for all of the other recordings, for all of our other webinars are available there. You can find more information about Eno on our website at www.enotrans.org. And if you didn't already know the value of Eno Transportation Weekly, you certainly know it now. ETW and Jeff Davis are invaluable resources for all aspects of transportation policy and practice, and especially his expertise in digging through these big budget bills, which is an awful lot to get through. For those who are watching live, don't forget to register for today's other Eno webinar featuring featuring Transportation Chief Innovation Officers. There's information on that on our website as well. Jeff, I want to thank you again for joining us today. Thank you for all this great information, and thank everybody for your participation. Take care, everybody.